The moment my brother's fist hit the table hard enough to rattle the wine glasses, every conversation in the room died. He pointed at me from across the dining room, my grandmother's dining room, with her good china still on the shelves and her smell still faintly in the curtains, and said, loud enough for 40 people to hear, "You've been stealing from this family for years, and tonight it ends. Pack your things and get out before I call the police." My dress was still wet from the water he'd hurled at me 30 seconds earlier. Ice cubes sat melting on my grandmother's hardwood floor. I set down my fork, reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope thick enough to make a sound when I dropped it on the table. "Call them," I said. "I'll wait. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe if someone in your family ever tried to make you the villain of a story they wrote, because what happened next took 2 years to get to, and it gets a whole lot worse before it gets better." My name is Jenna Calloway. I'm 32 years old, a licensed CPA working in commercial real estate accounting in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm the oldest of 3. My brother is Nate, 28, who has spent the better part of a decade convincing our parents he's one good opportunity away from success. My sister is Brooke. Wait, I need different names, my mind is still sorting. My sister is Piper, 25, who has spent the same decade convincing everyone she's too sensitive to be held accountable for anything. And then there was my grandmother, Rowena, 81 years old, sharp as a tack, soft only when she chose to be. She was the whole story. She is still the whole story, even now that she's gone. Growing up in a small city outside Raleigh, we weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. Dad worked in logistics, long hours and longer absences. Mom held things together with coupons and casseroles and a stubborn belief that family loyalty was the highest virtue. The house was small and loud and smelled like dryer sheets. I shared a room with Piper until I left for college. Nate had his own room from birth because, Mom said, boys need their space. I noticed things like that early, not bitterly, just I noticed. Grandma Rowena lived 40 minutes away in a craftsman house in a quiet neighborhood with old oak trees that arched over the street like a cathedral. She had been a bookkeeper for 30 years, then ran a small property management company for 15 more after Grandpa died. She sold the company in her early 70s, invested conservatively, lived simply. She had more than people assumed because she never talked about money the way people who have none do. She and I had a routine that started when I was maybe 12. First Saturday of every month, I'd ride my bike to her house. She'd teach me to reconcile accounts on paper ledgers before showing me the same thing on her computer. We'd have lunch, always tuna on white with the crusts cut off, always sweet tea, and she'd ask me what I was thinking about. Not what was happening at school, what I was thinking. Nobody else asked me that. Nate visited Grandma Rowena when he wanted something. I can say that plainly now without guilt, because it's just true. $100 for a school trip. Advice on how to talk Dad into buying him a car. A reference for a job application that he never followed up on. He'd charm his way through the door, eat her food, pocket whatever she offered, and be gone in under 2 hours. She'd watch him go from the porch and I'd see something in her face I didn't have words for when I was young. I have words for it now. It was recognition. Piper was kinder in her approach, which made it harder to name. She'd call Grandma Rowena when she was upset, cry on the phone for an hour, thank her profusely, and then go silent for 2 months. She had a talent for emotional intimacy that disappeared the moment the crisis passed. Grandma would mention Piper's name sometimes with that same look she gave Nate's departing car, a slight press of the lips, a turn back toward whatever she'd been doing before. My parents went through phases. Sometimes they made the drive regularly, sometimes months passed. Dad's excuse was always work, Mom's was always the kids, even after we were grown and gone and the kids were adults with our own apartments. I stayed consistent. Monthly visits turned into bi-weekly calls. When Grandma Rowena's knee replacement slowed her down 2 years ago, I drove up to stay for a long weekend, reorganized her kitchen for easier access, fixed the sticky lock on her back door, drove her to follow-up appointments. She didn't ask. I just knew what needed doing. "You've got your grandfather's practicality," she told me one afternoon. We were sitting on her back porch, the September air just starting to cool. He never waited to be asked either. She handed me a second glass of sweet tea, and we sat in comfortable quiet, the kind you only get with someone you've known long enough to stop performing for. I didn't know then that she'd already called her attorney 3 weeks earlier. Grandma Rowena passed in February, cardiac event in the night. Peaceful as far as these things go, which is what the hospice nurse said and what I have chosen to hold on to. I got the call at 5 in the morning, drove up alone, handled the immediate arrangements while the rest of the family was still processing. By the time my parents arrived, I had already spoken to the funeral home, watered her plants, called her closest neighbor. Mom cried. Dad stood very still the way he does when he doesn't know what to do with himself. Nate showed up with his girlfriend, who I'd never met, and spent the first hour taking photographs of the house interior on his phone. Piper arrived late, puffy-eyed, and asked 3 times if I knew where Grandma kept her jewelry. The attorney called me the following week. Private meeting, his office, bring ID. He said Rowena had updated her estate documents 18 months prior. He said she had been deliberate and specific. He said the conversation might be difficult for other members of the family and asked if I had support around me. I told him I was fine. I'm always fine. That's the thing about being the one who handles things. You get good at being fine. The estate was more than I expected. The Craftsman house, paid off, valued at approximately $340,000 in the current market. Investment accounts totaling just under $900,000. A small parcel of land outside the city she'd held since the 1980s, worth another $180,000 by conservative estimate. And a personal property list, jewelry, furniture, the good china, with specific designations. Almost all of it came to me. The exceptions were small sentimental items from my parents in a single line at the bottom of the document that I read 3 times. In the matter of Nathan and Piper, I leave them the lesson I could not teach them in life, that presence is not performance. And that love is what you do when no one is watching. No dollar figure attached, just words. The attorney told me I was not legally obligated to disclose the contents to anyone. He said Rowena had been explicit about that. He handed me a sealed letter in her handwriting and said she'd asked that I read it alone before speaking to the family. I drove to a parking lot around the corner from his office, sat in my car, and opened it. I won't quote it directly because those words are mine to keep, but she said she had watched for decades. She said she knew the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. She said she wasn't punishing anyone. She was just being accurate. And she said, don't let them make you feel guilty for what you earned. You didn't take anything from them. They took from themselves. I sat with that for 6 weeks. I told no one. Nate called twice, fishing. He'd heard from someone that Grandma Rowena's estate was being processed. Had I spoken to the attorney? Did I know if there was a timeline? I said I didn't have information to share yet and changed the subject. He pushed once more and I said I had to go. He hung up faster than I expected. Piper texted, a long one, 2 paragraphs, about how she hoped the process would be fair and transparent for the whole family, and how she thought Grandma would have wanted everyone taken care of equally. I read it 3 times looking for something genuine, and put my phone down without responding. Mom mentioned, carefully over a Sunday phone call, that the family should probably sit down together soon, that these things could get complicated, that it would be good to stay united. I agreed with her warmly and told her I'd be in touch once things were finalized. She seemed reassured. I did not feel reassured. The event that cracked everything open wasn't one I planned. It was my cousin Harriet's husband's 40th birthday, a party at their house, backyard, about 40 people, catered barbecue, the kind of suburban Saturday that seems completely safe until it isn't. My whole immediate family was there. I hadn't seen everyone together since the funeral. I wore a yellow dress, drove separately, arrived exactly on time. Piper hugged me at the gate in that way she has. Both hands on my arms, eyes too wide, the warmth calibrated to exactly the right temperature. Nate nodded from across the lawn, hand raised in a wave that meant something I couldn't quite read yet. The evening moved the way those things do. Food passed around, old stories recycled, my parents holding court near the drinks table. I talked to cousins I liked, avoided cousins I didn't. Ate a plate of brisket that was genuinely excellent. For about an hour I thought maybe I'd been catastrophizing. Maybe the family would be difficult and I'd hire a good attorney and we'd navigate it like adults. Then Nate walked up to where I was standing near the dessert table and put his arm around my shoulder, a gesture that would have looked brotherly to anyone watching. His voice was low and cheerful. So hey, he said, a few of us were talking. Mom and Dad think it would be cleanest if we just agreed to divide Grandma's stuff equally. The 4 of us kids plus Mom and Dad. Keep it simple. Keep it family. I looked at his profile. That's not how wills work, Nate. Well, yeah, but if everybody agrees? Agreements like that have tax implications, and they require all parties to consent. He smiled. That's why we're talking now, before things get formal. Things are already formal, I said. The estate is in probate. His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Jenna, come on, Grandma would have wanted. Don't finish that sentence, I said. You know as well as I do what Grandma wanted. He took his arm off my shoulder. 20 minutes later, Piper found me by the fence with a glass of wine and an expression I'd never seen her use before, calculated underneath the softness. She said she'd heard I'd been difficult with Nate. She said she understood it was a hard time for everyone, herself included, and she just hoped I wasn't going to let grief make me selfish. She said the word selfish the way people do when they've practiced it. I'm not grieving wrong, I said. Nobody said you were. You implied it. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again and said, voice dropping, you know you're not the only one who had a relationship with her. I know, I said. I just know what mine was worth. That's when Nate came back. He had a glass of water this time and my father was with him, and my father had that look he gets when Nate has been talking in his ear. Piper shifted to stand half a step closer to Nate. A small triangle, and I was the outside angle. Dad said, gently, that he hoped I'd think about the family as a whole here. That Grandma Rowena would not have wanted hard feelings. That dividing things equally was the honest, humble thing to do. I said, Dad, I love you. But what you wanted is in writing. The shift was subtle at first, conversation nearby quieted, heads turned without meaning to. Nate's voice rose just enough. So you're really going to do this? You're going to take everything and just… what? Act like we didn't all love her? I'm not acting like anything. You spent the last 2 years positioning yourself. You know that, right? Driving up there, fixing her gutters, playing the devoted granddaughter. I fixed her gutters because they needed fixing and she couldn't do it herself. And you never thought about the optics. I wasn't thinking about optics, that's exactly the point. His voice went up again. People had stopped pretending not to listen. My mother was making her way toward us from across the lawn, face tight. Piper said, quick and sharp, you've always done this. Made yourself the martyr, the responsible one, so everyone feels like they owe you. I don't want anyone to owe me anything. Then act like it. And then Nate, who had been simmering for the last 3 minutes, picked up the glass of water he'd been holding and threw it at me. Not the full force of a hurl. Not a gentle splash. Something in between, deliberate, stunning. Cold water hit my face and the front of my yellow dress and the dessert table behind me. The platter of brownies shifted. A few people actually gasped. Silence. Nate's voice cold now, the charm fully gone. You've been manipulating this family for years. You manipulated a dying old woman into cutting her own grandchildren out of her will. You're a thief, and I want you out of my sight. You've got 20 minutes before I call an attorney. I stood there with water dripping from my chin. Piper's hand was over her mouth. My mother had gone completely still 10 feet away. My father looked at the ground. Nobody moved to hand me a napkin. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. Dropped it on the dessert table next to the brownies. Great, I said. While you're on the phone with yours, let's talk about a few things. I pulled out the first document. A notarized copy of the will filed with the Mecklenburg County Probate Court. I read the relevant section aloud, not performatively, not loudly, just clearly enough for the people standing close to hear. The assets. The designations. The single paragraph about Nathan and Piper at the end. Nate reached for it. I pulled it back. Touching a filed legal document at a private residence isn't going to help you, I said. He froze. Second document. I pulled it from the envelope. A codicil, added 8 months before Grandma Rowena passed. A clause in plain language. Any beneficiary or third party who contests the validity of this instrument or initiates legal proceedings to redistribute its provisions shall forfeit any and all claims to relief from this estate and shall be liable for all legal costs incurred by the opposing party. Notarized. Witnessed by 2 signatures I didn't recognize, which meant she'd been deliberate about keeping it away from anyone we knew. Piper's voice was very small. She did, I said. She updated it after the Thanksgiving you didn't come to, either of you. Nate's face went through 3 expressions fast. That can be challenged on grounds of undue influence, I said. I know. It's the first thing people say. Her attorney has a 17-month record of communications with her on the matter, including a cognitive assessment she requested voluntarily at 79 years old. The results are in his file. Silence again, different quality this time. I pulled out the 3rd document. This one I had not been certain I would use. But when Nate threw that water at me, in front of 40 people, in my cousin's backyard, something clarified. It was a letter from the IRS, specifically a CP 2000 notice, a discrepancy notice, not a full audit yet, but the kind of thing that becomes one. It was addressed to Nate at his last known address, which was apparently the same address he'd given when he co-signed a business loan 3 years ago for a property management startup that had since dissolved. The loan itself, $85,000, a personal guarantee, had gone into default 8 months earlier. The IRS notice flagged $34,000 in claimed business deductions against a venture that filed no revenue in its 2 years of operation. I hadn't gone looking for this. Nate had listed me as an emergency contact on the original loan application, which I discovered only when the collections company called my number by mistake 6 months ago. I'd kept the paperwork. The loan default is public record, I said. The IRS notice I received because you listed me as a contact, which I'm guessing you forgot. Nate's color was wrong. Something between pale and red that I didn't have a name for. You can't use that. I'm not using anything. I'm telling you what exists. You said you were calling an attorney. That attorney will do discovery. Discovery will surface all of this and more. And the codicil will make you personally responsible for my legal fees when you lose. I tucked the documents back into the envelope, or you could not call an attorney. The backyard was very quiet. Someone's kid ran across the grass from the direction of the house, oblivious, chasing a dog. Nobody spoke for a moment. Piper sat down on the nearest lawn chair. She looked genuinely shocked, which surprised me, because I had expected calculation. Maybe there was a version of her that had actually believed Nate's certainty. We don't have anything, she said, more to the ground than to me. I know, I said. I didn't say it cruelly. It was just true. Mom finally reached us. She looked at my wet dress, at the envelope in my hand, at Nate's face. She said my name in a voice that was equal parts exhaustion and grief. Not here, I said, not like this. I said goodbye to my cousin Harriet, who squeezed my hand too tight and said nothing, which I appreciated. I said nothing to Nate or Piper. I nodded at my parents and walked to my car and sat in it for a long moment in the dark of the driveway before I started the engine. My phone rang 4 times before I reached the highway. I didn't answer. The estate closed 4 months later, straightforward and uncontested. The Craftsman house sold in 11 days, cash offer, no contingencies. I instructed the attorney to donate 10% of the proceeds to the local hospice organization that had cared for Grandma Rowena in her last weeks. It felt right, and she would have approved. The investment accounts transferred to a brokerage in my name. I kept the land parcel. A developer has expressed interest. I'm not in a rush. Grandma Rowena waited 40 years on it, and she was patient. I can afford to be too. The personal property list she left was precise. The good china came to me. Her reading chair. The set of paper ledgers from her bookkeeping years, worn at the corners. Her handwriting in columns so clean and even they looked typeset. I put them on the shelf in my home office where I can see them when I work. The jewelry she'd inventoried carefully by recipient. My mother received her pearl earrings and a cameo brooch. A bracelet went to my cousin Harriet. Everything else came to me, including a ring I'd seen on Grandma Rowena's hand, my entire childhood. Gold band, small green stone, nothing showy. I wear it now. Nate moved out of his apartment in March. I know this because my mother mentioned it, not because I asked. He's staying with a friend, I think. Or maybe the girlfriend, though I've heard she's no longer the girlfriend. The IRS situation is ongoing. I hope he gets ahead of it. I genuinely do. That's not sarcasm. Dad is a specific kind of misery, and I don't wish it on him. Piper sent me a text message in April. It was long, and it started with, "I've been doing a lot of thinking," and ended with a request that we talk. I read it on a Tuesday morning before work, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee. I thought about Grandma Rowena and her parking lot chair, the way she'd hand me sweet tea and wait for me to say what I was actually thinking. I typed back, "I need more time." Sent it before I could reconsider. That was honest. I don't know yet what I want to do with Piper. She is my sister, and that is not nothing. But Grandma Rowena's letter is also still in my nightstand drawer, and one line of it runs through my head sometimes when I'm tired and tempted to make things easier than they should be. You will know who is safe when they stop needing you to be. You will know who is safe when they stop needing you to be smaller, so they can feel big enough. My parents called on Mother's Day. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing difficult. It was fine. Things between us are fine. Careful, but fine. My mother asked if I was happy, which she doesn't usually ask. And I said yes, which was true. I had lunch with my friend Adele last week. She's been my closest friend since we both survived the same brutal tax season at our first jobs. 12-hour days and cold coffee and the particular gallows humor of accountants in Q1. She asked me how I was really doing, the way she does, and I told her all of it. The water thrown at my dress, the envelope on the dessert table, the quiet of my car in the driveway after. "Were you scared?" she asked. I thought about it for a real moment. "No," I said, "I was sad. I was sad. But I wasn't scared." She nodded like that made sense to her. I paid for lunch. I drove home through Charlotte with the windows down, the early June air warm and heavy with honeysuckle, the kind of evening that feels like it should mean something. I thought about the paper ledgers on my shelf, the ring on my hand, the land parcel I'm in. No rush to sell. Grandma Rowena used to say that patience isn't passive, that waiting for the right thing is its own kind of action, the discipline to not spend what you've built on the wrong moment. I'm still learning that, but I think I'm getting there. I still think about the moment right before Nate threw that water, the half second where I could see him deciding to do it. There was nothing impulsive about it. He made a choice, in front of 40 people, because he had spent so long believing that I would absorb whatever he threw at me, literally, as it turned out, and stay quiet the way I always had. What he didn't account for was that staying quiet had never been weakness. It had been patience. And patience, the kind Grandma Rowena modeled for me across 30 years of first Saturdays and tuna sandwiches and paper ledgers, is not the same thing as surrender. It's what you do when you understand that the right moment matters as much as the right action. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a fatalistic way, not like the universe was keeping score or handing out punishments. More like, actions accumulate. Every time Nate blew off a Sunday dinner with Grandma, every time Piper called in a crisis and disappeared when the crisis passed, every skipped birthday, every unanswered invitation, every moment they chose comfort over showing up. None of those choices felt consequential in the moment. They rarely do. But they stacked, quietly, into something that eventually had weight. And on the other side of the ledger, every drive I made, every sticky lock I fixed, every Tuesday afternoon I sat on that back porch and actually listened, those stacked too. Grandma Rowena was a bookkeeper. She understood better than anyone that the numbers always tell the truth eventually. You just have to be patient enough to wait for the final column. What I'd had to sit with in the months since is the question of whether I'm a good person or just a strategic one. I've turned that over a lot. I think the honest answer is that I didn't show up for Grandma Rowena because I was angling for an inheritance. I showed up because she was worth showing up for, because she asked me what I was actually thinking, because she taught me that detail and precision are forms of respect, because being in her house made me feel more like myself than almost anywhere else. The inheritance was her way of saying she saw all of that clearly. That's different from engineering it. But here's what I also know. Being a decent person is not enough on its own. Decency without the clarity to recognize when you're being taken advantage of is just a resource people extract from you. What Grandma Rowena also gave me, in those hours with ledgers, in her offhand comments about precision, in the way she watched my siblings leave and turned calmly back to whatever she'd been doing, was the understanding that you have to know what you're worth and be willing to defend it without apology. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about Piper's text, or my mother's careful phone calls, or the question of what comes next with any of them. Loving people and holding them accountable are not opposites. You can want the best for someone and still refuse to absorb the cost of their choices. You can be soft in the right moments and completely immovable in others. Grandma Rowena was both. The ring on my hand right now is a reminder of that. That gentleness and strength are not a trade-off. They're practice. I'm still learning it, but I think she knew I would be.